Hello and welcome to this special edition of Talk Time. My guest today is Dr. Bibek Debroy, one of India's most well-known economists, now the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Dr. Bibek Debroy, once again, welcome to Talk Time. You look a very happy man today. The country has just passed its budget with that massive boost given to the people of this country that India will become a $5 trillion economy in just a couple of years. And you are one of those economists in the country. Yes, there will be skeptics, but you are not one of them. You are an optimist. You've said that that is indeed achievable. What is the source of your confidence that we can easily achieve this target as enunciated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
I'm happy. Not just because of the budget, I'm happy because we are having a chat after a fairly long time.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Now, when one looks at a figure like 5 trillion, that figure is in dollars. So therefore, there is an issue of an exchange rate. If the exchange rate depreciates, the target becomes a little bit more difficult. If the exchange rate appreciates, it becomes a little bit more easy. But let's leave that technicality aside. To get that 5 trillion figure, we have a base, and the base last year was about 2.7 trillion.
Right.
Which means we need a rate of growth of about 12% per year. Now that 12% is in nominal terms because the GDP is in nominal terms. The inflation rate and the targeted inflation rate as per the RBI is 4%. So if I take away 4% from 12%, I get about 8%. The economic survey has told us that over the last 5 years, we have done 7.5 real rate of growth. Last year was a slowdown, but as a trend over the last 5 years, we have done 7.5. So the question is of going up from 7.5 to 8%. That is not very difficult, and I will just mention one. Because we are looking at 2024, 2025, we are not looking at further down the line when one can talk about efficient land markets, labor markets. There is plenty of slack within the system. There are states, particularly in the eastern parts of India, which have not grown that fast.
We'll talk about that. But long and short of what you were saying, Dr. Bibek Debroy, is this that it is achievable. You were saying that we need a growth rate of 12%, but if you took the RBI inflation rate at 4%, you minus that 4%, and you need a target of 8.5%. 8.5%. Since we are now at 7.5%, just 1% is not a big thing. That's what you were saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Now, point is, what about the economic slowdown? My question is, do you think that is achievable? A lot of people are saying that you actually have to grow at the rate of 13.5% if you have to be at $5 trillion economy. That is what is the mood among some of the economists. Yes, opinion differs, I know that, and you have explained so beautifully there. But how do you counter that? How can slow growth rate, the economy has slowed down. Take the case of the automobile industry. Only 2 days ago, there were reports that 30,000 job loss as of that date because a lot of dealers in Rajasthan, Maharashtra and all big cities have closed down. This is just one example. Are you worried, or there is no cause for worry, or is it just a creation of skeptics?
No, it's not a creation of skeptics, but at a certain level, the two questions, you try to link the two questions, but the two questions are also de-linked to a certain bit.
Okay.
I'm talking about the 5 trillion and the rate of growth. When you said 13.5%, that again is nominal. So the issue is that we are talking about a growth rate depending on your assumptions of 8%, 8.5%, 9%. That's the real rate of growth we are talking about, depending on your assumptions. Yes, there is a growth slowdown, and that's de-linked from the 5 trillion target. The question is the worst of that growth slowdown over, and how bad is the growth slowdown? And when I'm talking about the growth slowdown, one is talking about the aggregate growth slowdown, not necessarily automobiles, because automobiles are in a global slowdown everywhere. The last quarter's figures that we have were bad, they were 5.8, but for the entire year we had 6.8. A more pertinent question to ask is the worst over, and are we going to see a revival of growth, and if so, by what extent?
What's the answer to that?
What is
your answer to that?
My answer is not very different from the economic survey's answer, that you see certain signs of investment picking up again. Now, when I say that, please do not misunderstand. I am not saying that suddenly next year we are going to do 8.5%, because there has to be a gradual stepping up. So, my hunch is that we are going to inch up next year to around 7%, then 7.5%. Anything more than 9% will be very difficult, because the external environment today is not very kind. There are all kinds of tariff wars going on, there is protectionism. When India consistently did 9%, we had a kind external environment. Today we don't have that. But can we get to about 8.5%? I think the answer is yes, but not overnight.
Not overnight. Very true. Now, you see, Dr. Bibek Debroy, we have a Prime Minister who is decisive, who is capable of taking decisions. He has demonstrated his crowd pulling capacity. We had such a massive verdict in the last elections, and he is able to spring surprises. Like take the demonetization. A lot of people thought that, oh, this is the doom for this country. But we have emerged out of that. The BJP has again won with a massive mandate. The people still have faith, full faith in the abilities of the Prime Minister to turn things around. But as some of his top advisors in the economic front, what are some of the cautionary notes, and what are some of the things that you all may have told the government?
Well, what we have told the government will remain for the Prime Minister's
Absolutely.
Years.
Yeah, but what is it that you can tell the public of India, the people of India?
But let me mention something that is not directly linked to your question, but I think I should mention it. That certain things are desirable, even if they have short-term costs, including growth slowdown. GST, I am not debating about whether this GST is a perfect GST or not, because it's work in progress. If GST is desirable, if it has short-term costs, that sooner or later we should bear those short-term costs. If RERA is desirable and it shakes up the real estate market, then we should be prepared to bear those short-term costs.
Right.
And some of the resistance is because people are reluctant to bear those short-term costs. And including, and I want to underline this, people are reluctant to pay taxes. And I'm particularly focusing on GST now. Now, having said this, broadly there are 4 sources of growth in the slightly longer run, not 24-25, that's why I'm not linking it to 5 trillion. It's either net exports, consumption, public expenditure, or investments, primarily private investments. There are limits to public expenditure because you need to keep deficits under control.
Right. Yeah.
So, the simple one-point answer to your question is reviving private investment.
Reviving private industries holds the key. So that is a very important observation that you are making, which now what is the government's plan? How do you revive the private industry? That means that will lead to an economic boom in the country, because the government will act only as facilitators in that case. If you have to encourage the private industry to grow, the government role has to be limited. Just facilitate and forget about it, and prepare the right ground, prepare the right atmospherics around. Ease of doing business is something that is extremely important. So how do you plan to go ahead, and what is your target that you are trying to achieve? And that will also include the job creation, because that has not really nothing much to cheer about, although things are improving. But we have a lot to achieve on that direction.
I agree. I will not respond to the job part of it.
Yeah.
Not that I'm ducking it, but
Yeah.
I don't want to
Okay.
go off on a tangent.
Fair enough.
So we can
Fair
revisit it.
Fair enough.
Now, you use the expression decisive Prime Minister for the Prime
Right.
Minister.
Right.
I agree. But in a democracy like ours, there is the legislature, there is the judiciary. And the decisive prime minister is a prime minister who's the head of the executive arm of government.
Right.
We cannot compare with some neighboring countries and say we wish the judiciary away, we wish the legislature away. Depending on the year, 90 to 95% of our national income originates in states. So if it is national highways, if it is railways, if it is civil aviation, there are things the union government can do. A large part of it will have to be done by state governments, including revival of private investment. Because the investments do not happen in North Block or South Block, they happen at the level of the states. There are various reasons why investments get stuck. Some of them are clearances, and most clearances are linked to land and environment and forest clearances. There are also issues of disputes getting stuck in litigation. There are also issues that are connected to the financial sector. Banks,
Absolutely.
we know
Very
about
true.
that, banks not being prepared. So there's a whole bunch of issues, and therefore one needs to address them at various different levels. And I also want to make another quick point, which is sometimes not appreciated, that competition requires entry, it requires exit. You cannot have entry and no exit and say it's competition. This is for the first time we are threatened, or the country is threatened, with the exit of capital. And some of the resistance, not all of it, that we witness on the part of business is because they are very reluctant to exit.
All right, on the two very important points which Dr. Bibek Debroy, the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, is making at this point, is that private investments has to grow. The government is aware of it, government is facilitating that, but that doesn't happen at the central level, that has to happen at the states. One, and second point, he's saying that, for capital, entry and exit are two issues. Now the country is threatened with something exit of capital, but that is not something that is surprising. We'll carry on this conversation. We'll go for a short break. Don't go away. I'll be right back. Welcome back. I am in conversation with leading economist Dr. Bibek Debroy, chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Dr. Bibek Debroy, you were making two very important points. You said that while focusing on the need for the growth of private industry, private investment, you said very rightly that that doesn't happen at the federal level, it happens in the states. Now take the case, since we are talking in Guwahati, I'd like to draw your attention to the situation in the 8 northeastern states. Now, 70 plus years after independence, we are still waiting for big industries to open shop in the region, but that has not happened. So how do you expect a large part of the country, 45 million population, Northeast, totally landlocked as of now, how can things be different here? I mean, and how can it fit into the overall broad scheme of the country's growth plan?
I don't want to go off too much into history, but I do want to mention, economically, this part of the country was integrated with the neighboring countries. Forget 1947, even in 1935. So a large part of the answer will actually have to be in terms of better economic relationships with neighboring countries, including Bangladesh. What this government has done, and I think the government has not got adequate credit for that, is when you are talking about something being a little bit distant from mainland, some of it happens because of lack of transport connectivity. And what this government has done is improve transport connectivity to the Northeast, whether it is railways, whether it is roads, whether it is airports.
Absolutely.
And in some ways, that is the best thing that a government can do, because we are not in an era where you want the government itself to come and set up public sector enterprises in the Northeast. The rest of it is left to private initiative. Now, if one is looking at private initiative, there is the matter of clearances that I mentioned, including land.
Yeah.
And I think we do need to ask the politically somewhat sensitive question, that do we want a system where land markets are not really very efficient. And I'm talking about some of the land relations in parts of the Northeast, I'm talking about the scheduled areas. So we need to ask that question. We need to ask another politically sensitive question, which is in parts of the Northeast, we still have these autonomous councils. The autonomous councils predate a system when there were states. Now that we have states, do we need those autonomous councils? So we need to think about the governance structures, which is not something that only the Prime Minister can discuss. I'm saying that this is something as a country we need to debate.
Absolutely. Now, when we talk about the Northeast, we have a separate ministry, called DONA. Under DONA, there is a superstructure called the Northeastern Council, which is there from the 70s, a 70s era kind of an institution. Now, what is the relevance of an institution like the Northeastern Council? Because a lot of people don't have much good things to say. Let me be blunt, because only a blunt question can perhaps lead to a proper, honest answer. And you are also equally blunt in your responses. You don't shy away from taking any questions, but you may or may not answer. That's your prerogative. My question is, Northeastern Council, not many people have good things to say, because they're saying that they are embroiled in bureaucratic red tape, and there are a lot of allegations of corruption and so on and so forth. We have DONA and we have NEC. Yes, NEC works under DONA, but these are structures that are adding to the red tape and adding to the retarding of development actually.
I'm not going to comment on NEC and DONA directly, but let me make this point. You need some kind of institutional mechanism for the Northeast. And we know that NEC and DONA are not performing that very efficiently. This does not mean that you do not need an institutional structure. You do need an institutional structure, because sometimes there will be projects, maybe in transport, which transcend more than one state. So who takes that decision? Sometimes maybe there may be issues of disputes between states. So one does need some kind of mechanism. And by the way, the mandate of the Niti Aayog does provide for the existence of a regional council, which will transcend.
Is that the NEC, or is it something new?
It should transcend the NEC.
Yes.
Let me ask you the following question.
Yes.
This is you said blunt question, blunt answer. Why does a governor, what is the role of a governor in attending a NEC meeting? The role of a governor predates the creation of the state.
Absolutely.
So why is the governor?
It should be the chief ministers.
Precisely.
Who are directly involved in. Absolutely.
Precisely. Now please, it should not be interpreted that the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council has said this. I am just posing the question that all of us should ask ourselves. We have reduced.
With all due respect to the constitutional post of the governor.
We have reduced some of these to just ornamental roles, and we need to ask. Yes, there will be public expenditure that will come into the Northeast. What is the best delivery mechanism for that, bearing in mind the interests of the Northeast as a whole and not just that of individual states?
Is it, am I to understand that there is possibly a thinking within the establishment that the NEC or that new structure that may come up at, who knows, needs a total restructuring, and that rather than the governors attending, it should be the chief ministers, because they are directly involved in the policy making?
No, I didn't quite say that. I said that we should think about this.
Yeah.
What one should probably say is that this is not a decision that can be taken by Delhi, nor should it be a decision that should be taken by Delhi. It is for all the chief ministers of the northeastern states to agree on such a governance structure and such a governance mechanism, because it has to be done in consultation with them. Going off on a slight tangent, GST Council again. The GST Council, forget the GST rates and the products, is a phenomenal example of success between the union government and the state governments in deciding on certain things. Exactly similarly, there should be a decision-making structure that involves the union government and the state chief ministers to evolve such a governance structure.
Absolutely, that is a very big food for thought, and we have to deliberate on that. On that note, I go for another short break. Stay on. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm still in conversation with Dr. Bibek Debroy, the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Dr. Bibek Debroy, in the overall analysis, we are one success after another, which is a very good thing. India's image across the international community has greatly boosted. I'm talking about our latest mission to the moon. But again, while celebrating these successes, we cannot wait for something to happen and then do few other things. A lot of things have to move parallelly. My question is, science and technology is progressing very good. We have heard our Prime Minister the other day during the Kargil Divas that there is need to modernize the Indian Army, technologically absolute savvy force, which is also the people of India would really love and appreciate. At the same time, when people talk about the agrarian distress, people talk about the farm crisis among the farming community, the farmers, farmer suicides are still going on. It's not a question of blaming the Congress or the BJP or the XYZ. Why is it happening in this country? Let's depoliticize this whole issue. It's at the end of the day, it's a section of people who are driving the economy at the end of the day. That is the agriculturists. They are at the receiving end. That is the perception. That is the impression, and that also may be the reality, if not across the country, but in large parts of the country. How do you look at this?
We can go on and on about this because this is a serious issue, but we cannot do adequate justice to it in the limited time we have. We are talking about a whole bunch of issues. We are talking about policies that hinder commercialization and diversification. We are talking about inefficient usage of land. We are talking about not adequate spread of irrigation. We are talking about restrictions on inputs and outputs, marketing and distribution. We are talking about the lack of collateral. So, a whole bunch of issues. The farmer suicides are mostly being committed by landholders, not by agricultural labor. Sometimes if I am at the margin, I am a bit of both because I am wearing both hats. And the reason for that is profitability is getting squeezed and some of the land holdings are economically no longer viable. So, the simple answer is we are talking about too many people earning living from unproductive land holdings. Other countries have gone through this transition and we are going through this process of transition, and all kinds of policies need to be improved, union government as well as state government.
Absolutely, union government as well as state government. So there has to be a synergy between the. But you do agree that this is something that needs serious handling, that's something that needs to be translated into action. Where is the problem?
Well, most of agriculture is actually a state subject. There are very few minimal things that are on the union government list. We tend to think that all reforms are win-win. They are not. There are always vested interests which tend to lose. For example, if you talk about agricultural policy is de facto and has been for a long time a rice and wheat policy. There are enough studies to show that these only benefit the larger farmers. They don't really benefit all farmers as a whole. But the moment you try to change this, or the moment you try to have more realistic input prices for agriculture, including water or whatever, there will be groups who will oppose it. So therefore, in a country like India with a democracy, reforms will always be incremental, particularly in a sector like agriculture, where ostensibly 70% of the population is in the rural sector and 55% earn some kind of living from agriculture.
Yeah, true. And And when we look at the overall economic scenario, now where is the catch? Now a lot of people are now talking that okay, lending from abroad, foreign borrowings, like generating funds by use of bonds, floating bonds, and so on. That has again two sets of opinion, which is nothing to be surprised about. There will be people who said this is a good idea. A lot of people will be saying this is not so good idea. But what is your response to this whole idea?
Well, if you look at the criticisms are really, the serious criticisms are twofold. There are all kinds of other criticisms which are, we have never done this in the past. If you have never done this in the past, that's not a good enough argument, because we would have not done several things yet.
Absolutely, yeah.
The two serious criticisms are about the depreciation and the attendant higher costs of repaying the principal, and the idea of unmitigated, uncontrolled government borrowing, consequences to be paid for by future governments. At no stage has this government ever talked about not having a cap on the kind of foreign borrowing through bonds that would be done, if at all it is done, and we have adequate foreign exchange reserves. So I am not sure that we should jump the gun and assume
that when you say that we have adequate foreign exchange reserves, is that the solid foundation on which this idea is being formulated, that we have sufficient foreign exchange reserves, therefore there is no risk involved?
No. There are other reasons. The reasons, of course, is that it is always it is always easier for the government to, easier in the sense of lower cost to borrow than for the private sector. And if the government borrows abroad, it also establishes the presence of, for example, the rupee. If this
presence of the rupee abroad. Now, when you talk about the rupee, I'm coming to the end of this conversation. There are so many tourists who go out, and we all start, the common tendency among Indians is to count, what will be the Indian value? I'll not have this cup of tea for 350 rupees. They will immediately convert it. So when do you think that situation will ever come when, rupee will be, appreciate, and Indians, when they go abroad, they don't have to calculate that much, use the calculator that much. I'm talking in a plain tourist point of view.
No,
do you think dramatic changes?
No, mindsets change over a period of time. Mm-hmm. I know we are running out of time.
Yeah.
I still find it very difficult to throw away useless watches, because when in my growing up years, there was a shortage of watches, and I don't know if you know, maybe even you don't know, although you are knowledgeable generally, that an MP had a discretionary quota of giving a HMT watch.
MP,
a member of
Parliament. I didn't know this really.
Yeah, as I said, even though you are knowledgeable, you might not know this, because watches were a scarce commodity, and just that MPs can recommend
a telephone those days.
For telephone or a railway ticket now, HMT watches. So mindsets change over a period of time. But look, there was a time when there was a Hawala market. Mm-hmm. The Hawala market is gone. Today the rupee will be accepted legally in some countries in the Middle East. So the rupee takes time. When a country does relatively well, the exchange rate appreciates. So the rupee over a period of time, I am not talking about the next 5 years or so, is expected to appreciate. So somewhere down the line we will get there. And so far as this conversion is concerned,
I was actually asking you this, the appreciation of the rupee. That was what I was trying to get.
Ideally, it should not be done, because this is essentially PPP, because purchasing power parity, because a rupee buys 70 rupees buy much more here than a dollar would buy in the US.
Absolutely, but you were expecting, you were hoping that things will be much better in the days to come.
I think we shall see the beginnings of a growth recovery from next year.
We will see the beginning of a growth recovery from next year. On that positive note, Dr. Bibek Debroy, thank you very much for being on my show.